In this episode, I'm going to teach you all you need to know to be able to create your very first application on the ESP32. The first thing we're going to need is an IDE. All that is an integrated development environment. And the one we're going to be using is the one from the Arduino company. You can get it for free. There is an option as well to donate, but that is up to you. I am going to install it on this machine. Now bear in mind I am doing this on a fresh installation of Windows 10 so that you can see every step of the way what I'm doing so that you can follow along as well. So the software we need is just up here, downloads, and you should be able to download. Don't do the web editor, just go and get the full IDE. And obviously I am using Windows 10, so we'll just use that over there. But you can see that it does work with Linux and Mac OS as well. So the Arduino IDE calls each of its programs sketches, and here we can see here's a default sketch. There are two very important parts to each sketch. One is setup, which, as you can see by this comment, it runs once. So when the Arduino or the ESP starts up, it will run this code once. And then there's loop, which is basically something that just loops over and over and over. So those are the two core areas where we're going to be working. Before we can put any code on the ESP32, we need to set up the Arduino IDE so that it is able to communicate with the ESP32. By default, the Arduino IDE is set up for other Arduino devices. So we can see here a list of all the boards that it accepts. What we need to do is get a custom board put on here, which will allow us then to actually communicate with the ESP32. To do that, we need to go into File, Preferences. Then down the bottom here it says Additional Board Managers URLs, and we're going to paste this URL, which I'll leave down in the description below. So that there allows us to then pick up the board, which can allow us then to speak to our ESP32. So if we go back to Tools, Boards, then Board Manager, wait for this to load, and then just type in ESP32 at the top, and you should be able to see this over here and install whichever the latest version is. So this does take a couple of minutes, but there we go. We can see it's now installed, and we can close that off. This is now ready to communicate with our ESP32. Let's select the ESP32 from the boards menu. We can see that we have a few more options down the bottom here. The ESP32 dev module should work just fine for the module that I'm using at least, and probably the one that you have as well if you've used the link that I gave you earlier in the series. So we're going to select that, and then we also need to select what communication port we're going to use. Now we can see here this is grayed out, and that's because we haven't yet plugged it in. So it's time for us to plug in the ESP32 and get it talking to our computer. The COM port should have populated by now, so if we go have a look, we can see, well, it's already auto-selected COM4, but if it hasn't auto-selected for you, go into the port and select whichever COM port has come up. If you have multiple COM ports, you might need to test each one individually to see which is actually connected to your ESP32. COM port is literally what it sounds like. It's a communication port. It's time to write our first bit of code. Now, in the IT world, when you are learning a new programming language, there's a tradition that the first program you write is a Hello World program. I'm not one to break with tradition, so that's exactly what we're going to be doing today. The code itself is very easy for the Hello World program. There are two lines to it. The first one is initiating the serial monitor. So you need to type serial.begin. And this number here is quite important, which I'll explain in just a little while. And I'll also explain what the serial monitor is. You end off each line with a semicolon. That's just part of the syntax of this programming language. The second line is serial. So we're calling up the function serial, and we're using the method of print to actually print some text to the serial monitor. And the text we're going to have is hello world. And that's it, just 2 lines of code. So the serial monitor is up here. If you click on Tools, Serial Monitor, if you have 2 screens, then it's handy to go and stick this on another screen, but I'm just going to do that instead. The serial monitor is a way for you to communicate between your device and your computer. So it can send messages actually both ways, but for the majority of what we're going to be doing, we're just going to send it one way, which is from your device, your ESP32, to send messages back to your computer so you can see what's actually going on. This down the bottom here is very important. Make sure that you set this baud rate to the same number that you did when you set up the code serial.begin, because this is setting the speed at which it's communicating back and forth. If those numbers are different to each other, you're going to get some garbled messages or no messages at all. That's a common problem that people have when they start using this. They wonder why they're not getting their text back, and this is the main reason why. What we need to do now is actually send this bit of code to the ESP32. And the way we do that is click on this arrow over here. What will happen is it's going to ask me to save this code first. So if we just call it hello world, something meaningful, press save. It'll then, you'll see down the bottom here, compile this code. It'll put it in code that the ESP32 will understand. Once it's compiled, it's then going to actually upload it. So it's connecting at the moment to the ESP32. It'll then start uploading this code, and the ESP32 should hopefully, on the right-hand side here, write the words hello world. And there we have it. That is your first program. The ESP32 has actually sent this information from a device that's connected to your computer. It has sent that information back to the serial monitor, and you will see how useful this is in a lot of the work that we're going to be doing in this series. Let's do a couple other things just to change what I'm doing here, just to explain a couple other concepts that I've briefly touched on. The main one that I want to show you is the difference between this area over here and this area over here. If I take this line of code and I move it to the loop, what do you think is going to happen? Well, it's certainly not going to do this. It's going to do something a little bit different. Let me upload it and you'll see what happens. So there we go. It's just going to constantly send that message back to the computer over and over and over until I switch off the ESP32. There's another concept I want to show you when it comes to printing text, and that is the command println. And all that means is print line. It allows you to type that text, which will be hello world, and it will follow it with a return character. So the same as you pressing enter on your keyboard. So let's upload that and see the difference that it makes when it's sending text back to the serial monitor. And there you go. It's just sending the words, hello world. It's putting a return character in, and it'll then start a new line. So pretty straightforward, but these are important concepts just to understand, especially when we are doing some troubleshooting a bit later on, and it's going to make life a little bit easier for you. Let's make this a little more interesting. Let's add some more content. Now, the content we're going to add is going to be dynamic, which means it's going to change all the time, and the specific function I'm going to use is called millis. Millis is something I use all the time. It is so useful for doing many things within the Arduino IDE, and in particular, when it comes to timekeeping, it's essential. So millis is the count of milliseconds since the device was powered on or since the device was rebooted. If we do this and do that, because of the fact we're using print and not print line, it's going to put millis just before hello world, and that's going to allow us to have a bit of a neat line there and to show how many milliseconds have actually passed since we started running this code. So let's put that onto the ESP32 and we'll see what actually comes out. And there you go. Now we have the milliseconds on the left and hello world on the right. We are not used to really using milliseconds. Typically we'd use seconds. So let's convert the milliseconds to seconds so that it makes it a bit more readable for yourselves. And to do that, we'll show you a bit of maths within the Arduino IDE and how easy that is. I've used the slash key over there, which is basically divide. And we've just typed in the number 1000, and that should convert this to seconds. Let's just get that onto the ESP32 and see what that does. And there you go. You can see it's counting up just the seconds part of it, and that can keep going for days if you want, and you can come back and you'll see that will be counting up. And if you divide that by minutes and hours, you'll get an accurate time from when this program started. In this episode, you have learned quite a lot and hopefully feel pretty good about yourself if you've done this for yourself for the first time. I know when I first started coding way back when, it was really exciting to be able to get the computer to do something you wanted it to do, and hopefully you get that same buzz, and even more so when you're able to do some of the things that we're going to be doing in some future episodes. In this episode, what we've done is we've learnt about this area here, which is the setup area within your Arduino IDE. We've learnt about the loop area and the difference between the two. We have learnt about the serial monitor and making sure that you've set that speed correctly. And we've also learnt about serial print and serial print line. And those are some functions you're going to use regardless of how far you go with this coding, how advanced you get. You're still going to be using those commands, and you're definitely going to be using the millis command. And you'll see these things crop up more and more as we continue with this series. Before I sign off, I just wanted to make it clear, this is a beginner's guide. This is for people who have never actually done any coding before. They don't work in the IT world. You might be a trucker, you might be a marketing guy, but this is for everybody. That means that there's going to be some of you that know all this already, especially in the earlier episodes. Just have a bit of patience because there's some more interesting stuff coming along. But before we can get to the interesting stuff, we need to make sure that we know the basics first. So I hope that you enjoy this episode. I hope that it's doing the job that I'm setting out to do. And let me know in the comments below if you have any questions, and I'll do my best to answer. Until the next episode, thank you so much for watching, and stay spicy.